Welcome everyone. I'm just letting in people as they arrive. There's a little flurry. My name's Steve Hearson. I'm one of your co-hosts along with Simon Cavicchia. And welcome to this first of the two runs of What Drives the Need for Silver Bullets. The webinar is going to last an hour. We will finish on time. As it said in the invitations and also in the Eventbrite website, we are recording the session for those who possibly can't make it today. And also you will be sent a link to the recording as well. So I'm just going to let a few more people in before we start formally. Okay, and I think we will begin now. So, what drives the need for silver bullets? Before we start, just a little bit of contracting, and before we get to the introductions, I'd encourage you to remain as fully present as you can in this wonderful virtual environment, which means if you are willing, have your video on so that we can see you, and as long as the bandwidth is there, other apps and notifications off. Mute when we're not talking. Encourage you, we are going to have a breakout session to have honest conversations within those. Attending to being polite and respectful, and be curious, seek to understand. We are going to be playing in a territory where we are getting into the shadow side of organisations and leadership and our own practice if we're consultants or practitioners. When we're in the territory of silver bullets, we're in the territory of certainty and uncertainty. That gets us into our own stuff as well. So be curious, seek to understand what's going on for you as well as the people you may be talking with. A little bit on the technology. I'm assuming after 4 months of lockdown, you are all Zoom ninjas now. I don't really need to tell you anything whatsoever about Zoom. But assuming possibly that there is at least one Zoom virgin with us, just to highlight that we have got a few of the key functions there signposted. Main ones I'll draw your attention to: the change speaker view on the top right, the mute for your microphone and the stopping the video, and the chat function as well. If you hear me pause occasionally, that's also because I am driving the Zoom session and I'm letting in people who are appearing to the right of my vision. The other thing we're using today is something called menti.com. So if you are not familiar with menti.com, the ask is that you open up in a separate browser or in the app if you've downloaded the menti.com app, and we will use this to interact with you. So you simply, when you go to menti.com, you simply enter that code 456386 and you will see appear on it the instructions for the several points during the session where I'll be asking you questions. So to get you in the mood, as it were, I'm going to start by inviting you to enter in on menti.com one word for how you're arriving today. You're getting the hang of this already. I love it when I have a wonderfully compliant and obedient virtual group. And if you're on menti.com, you should see that the word cloud builds live. So that gives us a wee bit of data about how we're feeling today. For myself, I'm going to add tired, as I had my lovely 13-year-old daughter last night, needed some company, so she slept in our room last night, but her arms and legs were flailing like a Tasmanian devil in her sleep. So if I do occasionally talk gibberish today, I'd like to apologise. That is not my normal state of mind. That is largely sleep deprivation. Simon, do you have a word?
I put in excited. I'm feeling kind of a mixture of stage fright and yeah, excitement. Same thing, really.
Lovely. Okay. So now I'm going to take us back to PowerPoint. So, one more thing on Mentimeter. What questions are you coming with? Just to give me and Simon a bit of data. If you're on menti.com, if you could now enter in, what questions are you coming with today? We don't need a long list, obviously, as we have only got an hour, but a sense of maybe your top question. How to say no, lovely. What do we mean by silver bullet, lovely. Why I look for them. Nice questions. Dodging the noise, liking that.
That's nice.
We'll see a few more coming. What are silver bullets? Are they lethal? Short answer is if you're a werewolf, yes. If you're not a werewolf, then you might be okay. There's some lovely questions there.
Well, I just seen the one around how can exploring silver bullet theme inform supervision and coaching. That's a question very close to my practice, which I think supervision is a great area to be holding this pursuit of silver bullets in mind.
Lovely. So bear in mind, you will get to see this data because I will share the results with you after the webinar. So they will be there for you. So a very brief introduction. I'm Steve Hearson. In this context, I'm an author and researcher on this project, No Silver Bullet book. My day job, I am a consultant facilitator, and I'd suggest I spend most of my time working on collaborative practice within organizations, whether that be with leaders, teams, and often with internal practitioners of change, organizational development, HR, etc. If you want to know more about me, please stalk me on LinkedIn. Simon, care to say a few words about yourself?
Yes, very, very briefly. I feel very, very privileged and delighted to be asked by Steve to contribute to the project. So I'm going to be writing a chapter for the book on the psychological perspectives on the quest for silver bullets. I divide my time between a small psychotherapy practice now, quite a big supervision practice of coaches and consultants, executive coaching, and consulting in the area of leadership development, particularly helping leaders develop for stepping up to the more complex challenges that they face in today's volatile organizations. And also brought out a book a couple of years ago called The Theory and Practice of Relational Coaching, which Steve kindly agreed to put up there, where some of the ideas that I'll be talking about you can find if you want to read more around some of the things I'll be saying later. But a lot of what I'm saying is actually also hinting at new stuff that will be in the book.
Marvellous. So here's your menu. A little bit of gazpacho, scene setting, which we're kind of going to be getting into shortly. Roasted side of audience interaction and inquiry. Well, you've had a bit of interaction already. The inquiry will be coming. I'm going to give you a bit of a meze, a little hint of what I've been finding in the interviews I've been doing. And I'm going to share with you a couple of video excerpts from the interviews that I've done that are specifically in response to this question of what drives the need for silver bullets. And the dessert, well, there is no silver bullet. I mean, I'm just going to blow that one for you now. So there is no dessert today because when it comes to complex problems and challenges in human systems, I would argue, and certainly the data I've collected so far, is there is no silver bullet. So if you were hoping for the answer today, you may want to drop off now because I've probably given you the answer you need, which there isn't one.
I think we need to change that for next time to a digestif.
Digestif. All right, Simon, I will
rather
check
than
that
a dessert, so that you can go away and digest whatever has grabbed your imagination, if anything, from the webinar.
Brilliant. So a little bit of scene setting. This is a random Google search from last week. of the term no silver bullet. If you look at Google, if you look at news feeds and you do a search for the term, I think it's actually growing. Now that's a anecdotal assessment, but the term no silver bullet, if you just zero in and did a search for no silver bullet alongside, for example, COVID or coronavirus, you would see that no silver bullet is permeating the discourse and the rhetoric around COVID. My own connection to this probably started about 4 years ago when I still worked at Roffey Park. And some of you may be familiar with the corporate rebels. And Pim and Hust and their colleague Freak were over running a session at Roffey. And one of the things that they said during their session was they started their journey of traipsing around the planet. And they thought that by the end of it, they might find the silver bullet. And one of their conclusions after 2 years of clocking up air miles was there wasn't one. Now, what was also interesting was of the 20 to 30 people in the room, many of whom were organizational development practitioners and consultants and a few Roffey people, there were, even after that statement, a few people were asking questions which were laden with a sense of, but there is one, isn't there, really? Come on, there is one. And since that point, I've kind of got more and more curious about why is there this apparent need for a silver bullet? And when I work with clients, this apparent need for certainty. So the book, which if you want to read the synopsis and the introductory chapter, you can sign up for the newsletter, which I'll send you details of, and I'll be sharing access to that, so you'll be able to see more of the detail. But in a sense, the book is about how a number of different parties, players, and guilds collude consciously, unconsciously, with leaders and organizations to maintain the fiction that if we look long and hard enough, there is an answer to our complex challenges. So, another quick question. Do you personally believe that there is a silver bullet? And we'll go to menti.com for that. So if you go to your Menti screen, you should see the next question. I'm just going to bring it up. So far, we have mostly no's, a few it depends, and a yes. Okay. So again, if you haven't got to the menti.com website, a reminder, menti.com, and then enter the code there, 456386, and it will allow you to participate in what we're discussing. So I'm going to share with you now some excerpts from the interviews. I've so far interviewed approximately 20 people. This is the qualitative phase of the data gathering. I've interviewed people like Mark Cole, who's the author of a book on radical OD. I've interviewed people like Glenda Ouyang from the Human Systems Dynamics Institute, Jervis Bush, a number of my clients, some who've been anonymized for obvious reasons, Dr. Richard Claydon, who's a very interesting researcher and academic and practitioner based in Hong Kong. And that has given me a flavor for what some of the people who think a lot about leadership and organizations think about this stuff. There will be a slug of quantitative data that will be gathered soon, and the quant survey is going to go out as of this week, and I will share the link to that with you all in the one communication after this. So these three excerpts you're going to hear now are short, and they're in response to a question. And the question I asked my interviewees was, what do you think drives the need for certainty in leaders? And this is Mark Cole's response.
I think it's the fiction of fixability. I think if you're working in an ideological space where the expectation of you, particularly as a senior leader, the expectation is that you will get stuff fixed and you will be judged on the basis of that, whether you do it or don't, then you're quickly looking around for what's the best solution. And so a silver bullet is the best solution. It's the way in which you pop and the issue is managed in some fashion, and that allows you to reel away and say, I dealt with that problem.
So that is a snippet of Mark's thinking. Linda Holbeach, who is one of our most well-known thinkers and practitioners when it comes to HR and change in organisations. Unfortunately, the video connection we had that day was a bit poor, but nonetheless, a short response from Linda to my question was this.
Oh, gosh, I think that's definitely, as far as I can see, to do with anxiety, fear of failure, fear of the unknown, desperate desire to control one's own circumstances.
And that was Linda's response. The next one, that's not Graham, actually. That's just the video where it shows, that's my Zoom hair, my lockdown hair, which you can see I've actually had my hair cut, but that was only a couple of weeks ago.
There's probably lots of complicated answers to that. Fundamentally, though, I think there's one of the answers I think is true, is the we can't cope with not knowing. I think it's, I've rather glibly called it the curse of consciousness. Because we know we don't know, and that's fucking terrifying, right? So it's like, it's horrible to know. We're kind of, I think we're probably unique in the animal kingdom because of the nature of the way our nervous system is made up, and the size of our brain and the size of the cortex. Is what has emerged in human beings through a social process is the ability to know we exist.
And Graham is actually on the webinar today. So Graham is also hopefully going to be running a session with me at some point later this year. And I will mention a bit more about that later.
And you do challenge them.
Excuse me.
No one wants to hit.
Let's move slides. So a few of the other answers to the question you can see here. I'm not going to read these out, but I've highlighted in bold some of the key reasons that people gave for what drives the need for certainty. Fear and anxiety, or synonyms for that, came up quite a bit in the interviews. Neil Morrison, who's an HRD at Severn Trent, had a slightly different answer I thought was interesting. Pace did come up in a few of the interviews, but his phrase there's a level of laziness. This idea that, because we want to get an answer fast, that's actually quite a lazy response. Richard Clayton's answer was a very interesting one. He connected it to the Enlightenment and the promise of certainty that came through the Enlightenment. This idea that we can, if we work long and hard enough, create a stable, durable, predictable world, and the absurdity of that. And he connected that also to the problems with exec education and business schools, which is something that will appear in one of the chapters in the book. Three others, Jervis Bush, connected to the need for certainty. Another one of my clients spoke about vulnerability and the expectations and the pressure that leaders have in terms of they're expected to know the answer and what to do. And Glenda Oyang had one of the most interesting answers. She was very different. Her very rapid response to that question was privilege. It's privilege that drives the need for certainty. And she connected that to some of the wide issues we see in society today. So these quotes are going to be in the deck, which you'll see, which I'll send out to you afterwards. I'll share all of this. And I'm now going to hand over to Simon for his take on this, to build on those initial comments from the interviewees.
Yes, so very briefly, this is going to be a bit of a canter through some of the lenses and the perspectives that I find helpful. They're not mine, of course. This is kind of a synthesis of a whole range of other people's maps, but it's very much in the territory more of our psychological inner life and relationship to the outer world that we have to meet and interact with. And I just wanted to say something about theories and perspectives, really, because there's a risk with any theory that it becomes a stand-in for another silver bullet. We tend to find a solution or a model or a particular way of seeing something and get very wedded to it as if that will provide the answer. And one of the things that I've been discovering in myself for many years, and also in my practice coaching leaders, is that one of the things that can be helpful in befriending not knowing and uncertainty, which is often the precursor to having to find a silver bullet, is actually to get into a different relationship with things that we already know. So what I mean by that is holding our models and our frames of reference lightly, not taking any one lens or one theory to be a silver bullet, but simply a facet of a much more, inevitably, much more complicated reality or set of circumstances. And interesting, I hadn't heard those contributions from Steve's interviews, but because a lot of what I find helps me was hinted at in the interviews. And I think of theories as navigation tools. They're maps. They can never reflect the subtleties and the full dimensionality and contours of a physical space, but they can help us orientate ourselves. So here are some of the things that I find useful to hold lightly as lenses when it comes to understanding the psychology of our relationship to certainty and uncertainty. It's already been mentioned that we have a very sophisticated autonomic nervous system that has evolved to keep us safe. And in addition to that, as a species, we also have the newest part of our brain, the neocortex, which is where we make sense of our experiences. And so we're born with an autonomic, in other words, we can't control it, system that alerts us to when we might be in situations that are unsafe. And the way our brains work is we tend to form in the neocortex patterns of thinking and response that we can pull down like menus for dealing with familiar or situations that we encounter over and over. Whenever we encounter a situation that takes us outside of what's familiar, our nervous system can kick in and can lead us to respond with a stress-induced response like fight or flight, a moderate form of response to danger. So not knowing and losing our bearings in terms of not having maps to navigate a new experience can actually activate our nervous system. So that's the nature bit. From a nurture perspective, all of us develop a range of tolerance for things that are new and challenging based on early developmental experiences. And the neuroscientists describe this, people like Alan Shaw describe this, or Dan Siegel, as the window of tolerance. The window in which we can experience degrees of disorientation, but still go on functioning. Our neocortex can still go on thinking under pressure. And that window of tolerance has a lot to do with our early experiences of feeling secure, feeling that we belong to an environment of parents and other significant others and caregivers who are responsive to our needs, who can soothe us when we're overwhelmed and uncertain. And if we have enough of those experiences, we learn that experiences of disorientation and anxiety can be survived. Whereas if we haven't had a lot of those nurturing experiences, we can very quickly feel overwhelmed. We can get into full fight-flight responses, the amygdala hijack that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and then our neocortex goes offline because the blood supply to our executive function gets diverted to our muscles so that we can take evasive action. And we literally stop being able to think and make meaning from the new experiences. Later on in our development, we start to form a sense of our own identity. And this is often based on images we hold of ourselves that we might have been taught to take to be who we are. I'm just noticing my own disorientation. I can hear some work going on in the garden next door. and imagining that that's distracting you all. And I can feel my nervous system activation slightly, but maybe you can't hear it, and I'm just going to soldier on anyway. Ego ideals, this is going back to kind of Freudian concepts of the self. These are the images that we aspire to, that are often reinforced socially and in the context in which we live and have been brought up. The things we tell ourselves we need to be in order to be functioning. And these are often valued. So in going into social and cultural forces, in most organizations that I work in, knowing is valued far more than not knowing. Not knowing is actually often denigrated or seen as a sign of weakness. And two particular ideals that I write about and talk quite a bit about in my practice are the ego ideals of omniscience. That's the idea that I should really know it all. And the ego ideal of omnipotence, that I should be able to do anything I set my mind to. The example I always give is, in our minds we're omnipotent. We can actually dream of being able to fly, but if we were to jump out of a fourth-story window, it wouldn't end well, because there's a reality that exists outside of our minds and our capacity to imagine, in this case gravity, that we have to negotiate and choose how to respond to. Those of you who know me and what I bang on about, narcissism and shame are big parts of my practice and lenses that guide me. And I was just saying to Steve earlier, in a way, narcissism is the ultimate self-referencing search for the silver bullet. Within a narcissistic personality structure, which we all have to varying degrees, because narcissism is based on mistaking ourselves to be the images we aspire to, as opposed to identifying more with the flow of our awareness and our consciousness moment by moment. So in narcissism, we're not looking for silver bullets. We believe we are the silver bullet. But because it's just an image, and a deeper part of us knows that that doesn't exist, that none of us is the silver bullet, we require the world to keep reflecting back that we are the silver bullet, in spite of, and you know, I do think with certain world leaders at the moment, our planetary consciousness is being a crash course in the excesses of narcissism and how we need to avoid them at all costs. Shame is the emotion we feel when we fail to live up to those ego ideals and believe that as a result of failing to live up to them, we're somehow unworthy of connecting to others. I could say more about that, and I've written quite extensively about that. And where this ends for me, and this is quite a new area in my own inquiry, which I really want to explore for the chapter in Steve's book, is learning to differentiate between neurotic anxiety and existential anxiety. So neurotic anxiety, a very loose definition, is the anxiety we feel when we perceive that we have lost some kind of control or experience a loss of control. And we work very, very hard in neurotic anxiety to restore control. And a number of comments have been made about the human need for control, which is connected back to the neocortex's need to make sense of things. I'm a Gestalt psychotherapist, and we talk about making gestalts, Gestalt formation. Our minds like to form patterns and units of meaning, and when we can't, we get very anxious. So neurotic anxiety is behind the headless chicken syndrome, where people rush around doing anything, even if it's not thought through, even if it's suboptimal, even if it's causing a whole host of very negative and dangerous unintended consequences. I think there have been plenty of examples of that in the British government's response to the COVID pandemic. Just do something rather than sit with the unbearable anxiety of not knowing what to do. Whereas existential anxiety is the anxiety that is part of our human condition. If you take what the existential philosophers have to say about it seriously, it's the quality of anxiety that we experience when we fully come to realize that we cannot control and we cannot know everything that in the ideals of omniscience and omnipotence, our minds incline us to think we can control and know. And then we can start, if we can tolerate that anxiety, which is where coaching and supervision and helping clients in our OD practice becomes very important, is to be able to bear and tolerate levels of existential anxiety rather than try and disappear them or move away from them by getting busy doing something. If we can tolerate existential anxiety, we can start to pay closer attention to how we are making sense of our experience in the unknown and collaborate with others to develop new maps that are more relevant to context and fit for purpose. So I'm going to stop talking there because Steve in a minute is going to guide you into some small group work discussion. I just wanted to give you those, it's another smorgasbord of provocations to see what speaks to you and what doesn't speak to you. Again, please resist the temptation to see any of this as a silver bullet or as a definitive map, but the invitation would be to notice how you're being impacted by what you're hearing. Over to you, Steve.
Welcome back. You should all be flooding into our virtual space. So, I'd like you now, as you come back, if you're willing, on menti.com, just to share your in-the-moment reflection on what drives the need for certainty, if anything came out of that conversation you had with people, just to give a flavour of what was in the group chats would be lovely. So those of you who are joining, if you go to menti.com and just share a reflection on what drives the need for certainty in your view. So the first few that are up there, I think talk to some of what Simon was talking about, which is it's a very human condition we're dealing with. 2 votes for fear already. And the conversation I had with Miguel and Sam, who had problems with their breakout room, so we had a brief conversation together. We ended up talking, I think, about the fact that this is a lot to do with the human condition. And the human condition and the existential angst that comes from that is quite substantial and influences our behaviour. So there we go. There's quite a few there. So what I'm going to suggest now, as these come flooding in, and again, all this data I will make available to you so you can have a look at it. I have no problem with you using it in your writing. I'd just be grateful if you could share or acknowledge where you got this from, and providing nobody has an objection with that. If you do, then let me know. But there is a lot of useful data here about how we collectively, as a community that have come together for an hour, what we feel and what we think about what drives the need for certainty in organisations and leadership. So I'm going to just change gear slightly. In the time we've got left, just throw this open to any questions you've got for me and Simon, or indeed for each other. Again, just so we have an audit trail here and a capturing of this, what questions are coming up for you that we might, in the moment, just for a few minutes, respond to? And if there are lots of really interesting questions, just a thought that occurred to me, it might be that Simon and I, if we have the time and the energy and feel moved to do so, we might well respond to some of the questions that we're have left hanging, and write something and share it with you, possibly on LinkedIn, so we have a sense of how to respond to all the questions that are coming up today. Simon, that's one for you, I think.
Mm-hmm. I suppose I don't know exactly what's behind the question and who's asking it and what your relationship might be to vulnerability, but I think from my work in the whole area of shame, there's quite a lot of personal work that we need to do to get into a friendly relationship with our vulnerability, because we're so socialized, particularly in corporate life, to be suspicious of vulnerability. And so I think the short answer would be, do everything within your power to welcome your vulnerability to yourself first, and watch the ways in which you might subtly reject or judge yourself for your vulnerability. Because if you're fine with your vulnerability, then it will just be part of your presence when you talk to people and consult. You don't have to make it into a project. Just welcome it in yourself, and that will hopefully support you to be with it in your, well, whatever context that you're in.
So this next one, I think I have a very personal response to that, which is, can we escape the temptation to expect a silver bullet? I would say probably not. I recognise in myself, I'm desperate for somebody to come up with a silver bullet for COVID. I'm desperate for somebody to come up with a vaccine, or whatever the solution is. Magic potion, chip in my head. I don't really care. Please bring me a silver bullet. I think that's just part of who we are. You know, we seek some form of reassurance and certainty when things are at their most distressing and stressful. So I'm not sure almost whether for me it's a temptation. It's a condition.
Yeah. I just on that, the psychoanalyst Adam Phillips wrote a book called Terrors and Experts, which starts with the phrase, whenever we experience terror, there begins the search for the expert. So it's almost like the more anxious we are, the more inclined we are to look for the silver bullet. And then we mistake the solution as being one that's outside of us, rather than actually the source of the suffering, and the solution is always within us.
Yeah. This next one, I think, gets to the heart of, is in the absence of a silver bullet, if there is no silver bullet, sorry, is that you? Is there somebody waving, wants to say something? You're on mute there. No, still on mute. No, still on mute. Just pop your comment in the chat if you want, or your question in the chat. I'll just carry on. In this how can we move the system small or large? In the absence of a silver bullet, what can you do? There is a thread that is coming through from the interviews, which is that in the absence of any guaranteed answer, the best you can do is an inquiry. The best you can do is create the conditions for people to come together with the permission to ask any question, which means sufficient psychological safety, not total safety. I don't believe you can have total safety, or that actually it's desirable when you're dealing with stuff like this, but sufficient safety that you can ask any question. And from that, there's the possibility that together we may come up with the answer. So Richard Clayton has this lovely concept of the ironic employee. And I said to Richard, well, how's that different to the tempered radical? He said, well, the tempered radical has got an agenda and a purpose. The ironic employee has no agenda. They just have questions. They can see the absurdity and irony in everything. And when we are most in need of a silver bullet, maybe a little bit more irony might be useful. The definition of a silver bullet. Well, the silver bullet comes from mythology, human mythology. It's the bullet that is guaranteed to kill a mythical beast that we fear in in pre-industrial society. So it would be something like a werewolf, but it wasn't just werewolves. Creatures that are unkillable. The idea was that the silver bullet would get them. But also in more modern folklore, we have the Lone Ranger. The Lone Ranger had a gun with silver bullets. So it's not something that is that far removed in terms of our society. I mean, in terms of organizational definition, in leadership, it's that thing that leaders say with absolute certainty, this will solve it. And if you want examples of that, I'd say probably just look at some recent speeches by Donald Trump and Boris Johnson for fine examples of leaders who are offering silver bullets. Whether or not they're actually going to work, I leave you to
world-beating silver bullets.
World-beating. Are they inherently bad or impossible? Well, if you believe that they're guaranteed, yes. If you believe there's going to be a guaranteed outcome, yes. Impossible? Well, no, I'll never say impossible, because I don't know what will happen tomorrow. It is entirely possible that maybe, for example, just because Miguel was in my conversation, that Miguel may go into his potting shed and with some stuff in his garden concoct a wonderful potion that is a silver bullet for coronavirus. So I don't know. Maybe they are possible, but it's believing that they are by definition there that's the problem. Yes, I think this is an interesting one, redefining the near miss. Somebody said in one of the interviews, part of the problem is you have senior leaders spraying bullets all around the organisation. And the problem with bullets is once there's more than one firing around, you end up with collateral damage. So yes, when do you see leaders in organisations setting off multiple change initiatives in the desperate hope that at least one of them is going to bite?
Steve, can I just jump in very briefly?
Yep.
David Jarrett here. I wondered whether you or Simon would comment on, but surely everyone knows there aren't any silver bullets. So whenever they hear a silver bullet, we give it the appropriate ironic or cynical look. So although leaders speak in silver bullets sometimes, they're not heard as silver bullets. That would be my view. So I just wonder whether that...
The people know that they don't exist?
Yeah, I mean, we know that Boris Johnson hasn't worked out how to solve coronavirus any more than anyone else has. But we let him carry on in the way he does. My
answer to that is you and I would probably violently agree that's the case. But the voting patterns within, for example, the UK and the US would beg to differ, that there are people who believe wholeheartedly that there is that degree of certainty. And there are psychological reasons for that. Simon, do you want to just chime in there before we move to wrap up?
Hi, David. Lovely to see you.
And you.
I think there's a huge amount in what you're saying. The thoughts that I had, and again, not right or wrong, was I think denial has a huge part to play. We can sometimes pick up the dissonance between what somebody's saying and what we believe to be true. But to speak truth to power, to challenge it, it takes us into the territory of the emperor's new clothes. And I think psychologically, people then very quickly fall into colluding rather than challenging. And I'm interested in how do we support people to follow through on that neurologically derived sense of dissonance.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer, by the way, but then you wouldn't expect.
No, I just think it's part of the pattern. Silver bullets have to hit something, but what they hit may be ready to receive them.
Right.
In different ways.
Yeah.
Thank you. Lovely session, by the way.
Lovely. And just before we finish, so we're going to wrap it up there. There is no neat ending to this. So if you're expecting me or Simon to leave you a wonderfully neat, and here's the conclusion, I'm terribly sorry. Both of us don't believe that there is an easy answer to this. There's just many more questions. So what comes next? I'll send out to you the recording once I've just edited out the chunk in the middle where you're all having breakouts. There is a newsletter, and within that communication, I will put the link into that. And if you're interested, by all means, sign up. And coming through that will be, in the next week or so, a link to where you can find extracts to the book as I start to release them for people to have a look at. And if you're so moved, share your thoughts. If you love it, great. If you don't, well, just be gentle with me. And one of the next webinars will be with Mark Cole, the author of Radical OD, and we'll be discussing leadership development, the problems with the field of leadership development and how it creates the conditions for the patterns that we're all observing. And also we'll be touching on the complicity of business schools and exec education in that. Graham, who I mentioned earlier on, who's been on the call today, I'm talking to Graham about doing a session as well. And at the moment, yes, so far it's been white middle-aged men who are doing this, and I have others lined up who will bring the diversity. So I'm fully conscious that the only ones I've mentioned so far are lacking in diversity. So just to help me, if you are willing, because I'm wanting to know whether or not people are going to be around. So if you wouldn't mind, oops, beg your pardon. What's the best time for the next webinar? If you wouldn't mind just being willing just to give me a sense from those of you who have the energy. We have the second run of this with Mr. Cavicchia on Thursday, but I'm currently working out when to run the next webinar in this series. So the series of webinars is going to be basically on some of the core themes from the chapters. And I'm probably going to get something totally inconclusive, which will mean I'll have to just make a best guess anyway. But
technology doesn't work as a silver bullet.
no, why not, Simon? Why not? That's marvellous. So that's a sense there. And then lastly, just as you go, a thank you from us, and you feel so moved, just share with how today was for you, so me and Simon get a sense of how it was and what we might change, if anything, for the second audience on Thursday. So thank you very much for your attention and for your willingness to play. I hope there was a nugget or two of useful stuff in there, and I hope to see you. Well, I was about to say, I hope to see you here again. I hope to see you in the real world at some point. It'd be lovely to see you in person, whether it be for a cup of tea or a coffee or a beer. So go well. Please stay in touch. Communicate with me and Simon. We'd love to hear from you. And take care out there.
Thanks, guys. Super session.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you,
Hi,
Simon.
Mike.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, guys. Really, really interesting.
Good.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Thanks both. Bye-bye.
Bye, Claire.
Lovely to see you.
Likewise.
Take care. Bye-bye. See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Good.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. That was great. Take care. Bye.
Bye, John.
Hey, John.
Nice to see you guys.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Simon. It was nice
You're
to catch
welcome.
up.
Lovely to see you, Phoebe.
Bye.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Okay, that was great for me, and really enjoyed seeing the interaction as well with the interactive tool. I think that's been brilliant to see that feedback straight away. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. You're welcome. Bye.
Great. So thanks all. So I'm going to close the session now. Go well. And Simon, I will catch up with you afterwards.
Yeah.